Have you noticed how difficult it can be for us humans to stand steady in a truth principle in the face of an opposite appearance? To stand steady in abundance, for example, while experiencing a significant financial challenge, or to stand steady with wholeness in mind while observing distressing medical symptoms. And why are we humans more likely to shrink back and wimp out rather than stand up for ourselves or for something we believe in? To stand up and insist on justice for someone else. How easy it is to give up on our intentions when we face an obstacle, to disappoint ourselves. As in this line of Sia's lyrics in her song Courage to Change, which says to me hauntingly, I abandon myself daily. IMHO, well, in my humble opinion, we could use a dose of spiritual strength. I see it all around me, and I certainly feel like I need to call myself up to spiritual strength. So today's message is devoted entirely to this one power of all of our 12s. Why? I don't know. It's rising up right now as like such an important power for us in so many ways. Spiritual strength, one of the 12 powers, of course, taught in unity, one of our innate capacities. It's an essential remedy for a mindset of insufficiency, which we've learned in this series is a perfectly human tendency to view ourselves as weak and unable. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, defined strength as freedom from weakness, stability of character, and power to withstand temptation, capacity to accomplish. I think of spiritual strength as standability. 3 aspects of spiritual strength are these: stability, or the ability to stand steady; courage, the ability to stand up; and tenacity, the ability to stand ready. Let's look at these capacities one by one. Sometime in my preteen years, I was on a pony. It was the one and only time in my whole life I got up. And I think this one experience just ruined the possibility for me ever since. Maybe I'll try again someday. But I call this my once upon a pony story, because I just remember somebody set me up on this pony, kicked the pony, and the pony started going. I had never learned, no one instructed me what I was supposed to do once I was upon the pony. So here I am, stiff and rigid. And those of you who do ride, you know that's the opposite of what you need to do in order to stay on top of that pony, correct? Secondly, I had no idea what to do with the reins in my hands. I mean, I was falling half off the pony, and the pony kept running faster and faster. It saw a bale of hay near the stables, and it just went for it. I was terrified, and I did almost fall off. Interesting, where a horse lives is called a stable. Yeah, to be stable is, of course, to be anchored to a firm foundation, the ability to hold a position, and metaphysically, to hold our thoughts steady. It means unwavering and centered. So, spiritually, I can harness my thoughts and hold the reins on a truth while the terrain shifts around me. Have you had enough of my metaphor yet? A man who tells a remarkable story about standing steady through terrible circumstances, spoke at Unity Church of San Antonio many years ago when I was minister there. He made the circuit around Unity churches, so you may know of him. His name is Terry McBride. He's the author of The Hell I Can't, published in 2013. Terry said, at one point, it didn't matter that I had an incurable disease. It didn't matter that the odds against my getting well were 1,000,000 to 1. It didn't matter that some of the finest doctors in the world said I couldn't expect to come out of this ordeal whole. He said, I was done listening. Well, Terry goes on to report about how he stood steady in the knowledge of wholeness as the abiding truth about him through several years of contrary appearance, terrible appearance. In last week's message, The Audacity to Heal, I spoke of how I healed the image of my father. Well, along with the executive powers of the brain and all the other powers, I employed the power of spiritual strength because I stood steady in the knowledge that my father and I are one through 9 long years of separation from him. Spiritual strength says, I stand steady in the knowledge of wholeness during times of medical distress. I stand steady in the truth of unifying love when someone I care about has rejected me. I stand steady in my vision, my power of imagination, when I didn't get the job that I had hoped for. I stand steady in wisdom when worried about my child's self-destructive behavior. Spiritual strength helps us embody all the other powers. Did you hear that in these cases? The powers of wholeness or life, love, imagination, and wisdom, for example. Well, think of the physical posture that begins a Tai Chi practice. It's a semi-squat. Also in yoga, it's called skandasana. Standing steady and stable in physicality is a reflection of our core strength. Spiritually, I stand steady and stable in a truth principle that I need while circumstances shift. Affirm to yourself, by the power of spiritual strength, I stand steady and stable. A second aspect of spiritual strength is courage, the ability to stand up. And the number one characteristic that defines a hero in our culture is courage. You could say that courage is the superpower of superheroes. Heroes are empathic, deeply caring about the well-being of others. They're willing to face dangers that others would run from. They put themselves in harm's way in order to spare others. They stand up to bullies. They slay dragons. Well, maybe you purchase advance tickets for opening night at the next Marvel movie, or you relate to Disney characters like Mulan, or to Harry Potter, or the Black Panther. Or perhaps you get inspired by everyday heroes, like the police officer who risked her reputation and the ridicule of her team to shelter a suspected wrongdoer, displaying obvious symptoms of mental illness. Or the off-duty medic who jumped into the flames of a burning vehicle to pull out the driver. We're especially moved by displays of courage that right wrongs. We all want to stand up for our values in ways that are personal as well as communal. Courage is an inherent capacity, just like all our powers are. Spiritual courage underlies our ability to act courageously in time and space, to realize or make real our capacity to stand up. The proverbial dragon that you slay could be quite personal. It could be your overcoming a consciousness of sickness or of poverty or of worthlessness or of distrust in relationships. Or you could focus innate courage on issues of justice, dignity, and opportunity that show up in your community, in the world around. Let me tell you about my daughter, Alicia. When she was in her late 20s, she was raised as a Unity kid, by the way. Alicia had watched an episode of television back in that day. It was called What Would You Do? Do you remember this show? Hidden cameras watched behind the scenes as actors created a scene in public. In this case, the scene that Alicia watched was of a group of boys on a street that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, turned on one of their group and started beating up on him. The cameras were watching as bystanders, one by one, walk past. And the host of the show asked pointedly in the camera, "What would you do?" Well, Alicia was so disturbed by this question that she called me like in guffaws of tears. What bothered her most, she kept saying to me, is, "Mom, I don't know what I would do. I know what I would want to do, but I'm afraid I might not have it in me to get in the middle of a brawl, to put myself in danger to help someone else." Well, friends, I kid you not that 24 hours later, I got another call from my daughter. That next morning, after she had watched the show, Alicia had been waiting at her bus stop in Chicago on her route to the school where she was a teacher's assistant for teenagers with autism. Right there at the bus stop, a group of middle school boys had gathered at the stop, and no kidding, without any notice, the biggest, tallest, gruffest looking of the group turned toward one of the other boys and started pummeling him. And just as it happened on the show the night before, all the other boys joined in and started punching on this boy. Well, Alicia breathlessly was recounting this to me, and she said, "Mom, I didn't even stop to think about it. I saw that kid being hit, and I just went right up to the instigator. I had to look way up and crane my neck. He was so tall next to me, but I shouted up at him with pointing my finger saying, 'Stop it right now.'" She said he was stunned. And she said, "I locked eyes on this kid and I did not back away. I did a stare off with him. And at some point, he lowered his eyes and he walked away." At that point, her bus arrived and Alicia got on the bus. She made it all the way to her school, where she describes going into the faculty room and falling on the floor in a puddle of tears because the fright of that experience was catching up to her. But she said, "But Mom, I did it. I answered the question." It probably won't surprise you to know that my daughter, Alicia, is an empath. She feels and she cares. Well, she rose up in all her spiritual strength, and she stood up for a kid that she had never met and would never likely come across again in this lifetime. Wow. Sometimes, though, our values bump up against one another. When this happens, it can complicate our intention to stand up. Lots of examples of values conflict occurred during and in the aftermath of the pandemic. You had to decide, didn't you, whether to attend an event with relatives you know had not been vaccinated and would not be wearing masks. You had to determine which of these two values would rise as a priority: the value of extended family connection and the value of safeguarding yourself and your immediate family. You have to decide which is more important in a moment and stand for that value. If you would opt to safeguard your immediate family, you'd be missing out on seeing relatives that you love, especially that one aunt who you may not ever have a chance to see again as she is dying. If you would opt to attend the gathering, you would risk the possibility of becoming ill or infecting those you share your home with. Now, there's no right or wrong answer. There is the matter of what you stand for. What is your highest value at that time? What issues in the world do you care most about? And what are you doing to stand up for those causes? I have given this a lot of thought. I've even marched in a protest in my county a few years ago. I thought it was mine to do, but in the aftermath, I didn't see that it made any difference at all. The more I thought, the more I gathered that the difference really can be made in the voting booth. Therefore, what I did was I signed up with an organization that holds letter writing campaigns to encourage lapsed voters in my party to get to the polls. I write letters to people I'll never probably ever meet in person in my state as well as in other states. I let them know why I vote, and I ask them to make their voices heard by voting. Because, I'm not the person to march and protest. I'm not the person to go door to door. I am a person who can write letters and maybe a person who will drive people needing a ride to the polls on voting day. Only you can decide, what do I stand for? And in that which I stand for, let me stand up. Affirm to yourself, by the power of spiritual strength, I stand up. A third way that spiritual strength can be displayed is by keeping on, otherwise known as tenacity. Tenacity is our power to stand ready. So in 1953, a man named Norm Larson set out to create a water displacement formula. It was going to be used for rust prevention and degreasing in the aerospace industry. Well, the product turned out to work so well that employees were sneaking some home with them to use in their house projects. Well, Larson took note of the effectiveness of this and began to search for ways to expand his business. And he decided to put it into aerosol cans for at-home use. 5 years later, the product ended up on store shelves and continues today to be sold in every hardware store. The product, WD-40. Where did WD-40 get its name? It means water displacement perfected on the 40th try. Now that's tenacity. Did you know that Walt Disney was turned down 302 times by bankers and financiers who thought his idea of Mickey Mouse would go nowhere? And at the age of 65, Colonel Sanders started traveling by car to different restaurants. He was cooking his fried chicken on the spot for restaurant owners, saying, if you like this chicken, can we enter into a handshake agreement for you to sell it? Do you know he was turned down 1,009 times before the first restaurateur took him on? These, to me, they're heroes. These persistent, tenacious beings prove the maxim, if at first you don't succeed, right? Well, partnered with zeal's devotion and power's concentration, tenacity's stance can be graceful persistence. So think of it this way. I can hold graceful persistence, stand ready in a consciousness of wholeness, even while I undergo medical treatment. I maintain graceful persistence in cleaning up my own consciousness after a fallout with a relative. I maintain graceful persistence in imagining and planning for a major career move, even as the needs of my children or parents require me to delay executing that plan. Say to yourself, I am spiritual strength, standing steady, courageous, and tenacious. Let's take this idea to meditation as we meditate on our own capacity for spiritual strength. You know how to begin in your own posture for prayer. And let me invite you, maybe for this one, to get in touch physically with your power center for strength, right? And to do this, I encourage you to sit forward in your chair, like toward the front of your chair, feet spread shoulder width apart and flat on the floor. As you slightly press your pelvis forward, you can see that lengthens your spine. As you keep your spine lengthened, now bend forward from the waist, not in the middle of your back, but from the waist, keeping your spine lengthened. And place your elbows on your knees. Fold your hands together at your chin and rest your head in your hands. I'm going to not stay in this position so that you can hear me. And stay in this position just as long as you can do it comfortably and yet still be at attention. As you steady yourself in this position, just make some micro adjustments as needed for your comfort, and so that your attention can be on the small of your back, your seat of spiritual strength, right where your back bends. So centering attention on the small of my back, I spread the spring green light of spiritual strength throughout my body. I open to that light of strength, to the truth of my magnificent capacity to stand steady, to stand up, and to stand ready. I recognize the principle of stability, of courage, of tenacity. These are my source powers. And every one of them is inherent. They are infinite and infinitely accessible to me at any time. So I claim that not only is spiritual strength accessible by me, it is me. It's my nature by right of my full humanity and full divinity. I claim and I am spiritual stability. I stand steady. I claim and I am spiritual courage. I stand up. I claim and I am spiritual tenacity. I stand ready. I am spiritual strength. Let's pause in silence for a moment to let that in, to integrate that I am fully human and I am fully divine with all the capacity of spiritual strength. Claiming the full power of spiritual strength now. I realize that I am fully able to stand steady as the winds of change swirl around me. I never have to be thrown or tossed about by shifting circumstances. I stand steady, spiritually strong. And I am able to stand up for my values, backed by zeal and spiritual power. I stand up, I speak up, and I am a force for powerful, constructive, evolutionary progress. I am able to stand ready by my power of spiritual tenacity. I never have to cave in the face of seeming obstacles, but I can stand ready, forward facing, persisting in the direction of my intentions. I am just filled with appreciation to know that whenever I perceive that I am weak, I can now declare with confidence the great truth of being, that all the strength I could ever need, that I am, it's mine. And I call forth strength from within me, appreciating my limitless power to stay strong in all circumstances. For this is the truth of being, and I have it in me. And surely the world could use a dose of my spiritual strength. And so I say, I am that strength. I am. And so it is. And so it is.